The stairs in Sector 9 true story from a true account posted to r/Nosleep by u/Search and Rescueds Part 1. The Rule Nobody Explains Chapter 1. What they tell you on the first day, there is a rule that every search and rescue officer learns early in their career. And the rule is this: if you find a staircase in the woods, you do not go near it. Nobody explains why. Nobody frames it as unusual. You learn it the way you learn all the other procedural rules of the job, in a flat and matter-of-fact briefing on your first week, sandwiched between instructions about radio protocols and the proper way to bag a biological sample at a recovery scene. The officer giving the briefing will say it once, look at you to confirm you heard it, and then move on to the next item. If you ask any questions, which most new officers do, you will be told that it is protocol and that protocol exists for good reason, and that you will understand once you have been on enough calls. My name is Ray Calloway, and I spent 11 years as a search and rescue officer for the United States Forest Service, working out of a district office in the Pacific Northwest that covered approximately 4,000 square miles of federally managed forest land. In those 11 years, I responded to more than 600 calls. I found living people and dead ones. I found people who had been missing for days and were dehydrated and frightened and grateful. And I found people who had been missing for hours and were in conditions that suggested they had not simply gotten lost. I found the stairs many times. I followed the rule every time except the last. I am writing this account because the events of my final year with the Forest Service have not been reported accurately, and because 3 of my colleagues are dead, and because what killed them has never been correctly identified, and because I believe that if I do not write down what I know, what I saw, and what I eventually understood about those stairs, the knowledge will die with me, and whatever happens next will happen in the same ignorance that cost 3 good people their lives. I have been asked by my former supervisor not to speak publicly about any of this. I have been advised by a representative of the federal agency that conducted the post-incident review that speaking publicly could constitute a violation of the non-disclosure agreement I signed at the conclusion of that review. I signed the agreement under duress, and I do not consider it binding, and I am writing this anyway. Let me start at the beginning. Chapter 2. Sector 9. The district I worked in was divided into 12 operational sectors for administrative purposes, each sector corresponding to a geographic area of the forest defined by topographic features and trail infrastructure. Most sectors had names that reflected something about them. Sector 3 was called the Ridgeline. Sector 7 was called the Meadow Run. Sector 11 was called the River Corridor. Sector 9 did not have a name. It had a number and nothing else. And when you asked senior officers about it, which new officers always did eventually, they would tell you that Sector 9 was just a sector, and that all sectors were the same, and that you should familiarize yourself with the topographic maps and move on. Sector 9 covered roughly 340 square miles of old-growth forest in the southeastern corner of the district. It had no established trails, which was unusual for a sector of that size. It had no designated camping areas, no fire roads, and no maintenance schedule. It appeared on the district maps as a gray shaded area with the sector number in the center and a dotted perimeter line, and the shading was the same shading used elsewhere on the maps for areas that were topographically difficult or ecologically sensitive. It also had, according to every senior officer who had worked the district for more than 5 years, the highest concentration of staircases of any sector in the district. I learned this from a woman named Vance, who was the senior officer in my team when I joined, and who had been with the Forest Service for 19 years. and who possessed the particular quality of competence and quiet authority that comes from having seen a great many things and having decided which of them are worth being afraid of. Vance told me about Sector 9 on my third week on the job, during a long drive back from a recovery call in Sector 6. She told me without dramatic emphasis, the way she told me everything, as useful information that I would need to do my job correctly. She told me that the staircases in Sector 9 were different from the ones in other sectors. I asked her how they were different. She was quiet for a moment, watching the road. "They are older," she said, "and there are more of them, and they are arranged." I asked her what she meant by arranged. She glanced at me from the driver's seat and then looked back at the road. "Like someone put them there on purpose," she said, "in a pattern." I do not know what the pattern means. I stopped trying to figure that out a long time ago. I did not ask her anything else about it that day. I had the instinct, which I had learned to trust in the first weeks of the job, that there were things Vance would tell me when she decided to tell me, and that pressing her before she had decided to do that was not useful. Chapter 3. The first staircase I ever found. I found my first staircase in the 5th month of my first year, during a search operation for a missing hiker in Sector 4. The hiker was a man in his 50s who had set out on a day hike along a well-maintained trail and had not returned to the trailhead by the end of the day. His wife had called it in. We had been searching for 6 hours when I moved off the main trail to check a drainage gully that showed up on my topographic map as a possible route someone might take if they had left the trail for whatever reason. The stairs were at the bottom of the gully. They were made of wood and they were not new. The wood was weathered to the particular silver-gray color that old cedar gets when it has been exposed to rain and sun for many years, and the grain of the wood was raised and rough in the way of wood that has been through many wet seasons. The stairs had a simple railing on the left side, made of round wooden posts with a single horizontal rail, the same construction you would find on a staircase in an ordinary house. There were 11 steps. They rose to a height of approximately 9 feet and then stopped, the topmost step opening onto nothing, the air above it undifferentiated from the air at any other point in the gully. There was no structure around them. No house, no barn, no foundation. Just the stairs, rising from the gully floor to 9 feet of nothing, the forest continuing on either side of them as though they did not exist. I stood at the base of the stairs and looked at them for a long time. I thought about Vance's briefing. I thought about the rule. I took out my radio and reported the location of the stairs to base and noted them in my field log with coordinates. Then I moved away from them and continued the search. We found the missing hiker 2 miles further along the drainage. He was alive and uninjured, just disoriented, and he was sitting on a rock when we found him with the look of a man who is profoundly embarrassed about something. He had wandered off the trail to answer a call of nature and had somehow become turned around and had spent 6 hours walking in what he had believed was the right direction. On the drive back, I mentioned the stairs to the officer I was riding with, a man named Teller who had been with the service for 8 years. "Yeah," Teller said. "Has anyone ever gone up them?" I asked. Teller was quiet for a moment. "Not anyone who stayed with the service," he said. I waited for him to elaborate. He did not. Chapter 4. What Vance told me 3 years into my tenure. Vance and I were overnight on a recovery operation in Sector 8 when she decided to tell me the rest of it. We were camped at a high point above the search grid, eating from the field ration packets that were the standard overnight provision. And the night was clear and very cold, and the forest below us was a dark mass against the darker sky. She told me that in her first year, before she had fully internalized the rule, she had climbed a set of stairs she found in Sector 2. She had been alone. She had climbed to the top and stood on the highest step and looked out and had seen the forest from 9 feet up and it had been just the forest, trees and canopy and sky. Nothing different, nothing wrong. She had climbed back down. Then she had turned around at the bottom and looked back up at the stairs, the way you might turn at the bottom of any staircase to look back at where you had been. There was someone on the top step, she said. She said this quietly and without dramatic emphasis, in the same tone she used for all factual statements, and I absorbed it in the same way. Someone, I said. A figure, she said, standing on the top step, facing away from me. Looking out at the forest, about the size of a person, she paused. I could not see it clearly because it was behind the stairs when I was on them. It was not there when I was on them. It was only there when I was off them and looking back. I thought about this. Did you call out to it? I asked. No, Vance said. I walked away very quickly and I did not look back again. She was quiet for a moment, tipping the last of the field ration into her mouth. The problem with looking back, she said, is that it always knows when you look. Every time I have seen something at the top of those stairs, it has been facing away. But I have never looked back a second time from the same spot, because I have always had the very strong sense that if I looked a second time, it would have turned around. I sat with that for a moment. Has anyone, I asked, looked back a second time? Vance looked at me across the camp stove. 3 officers that I know of, she said. 2 of them were in the service before I joined. I know about them from second-hand accounts. They did not continue with the service after the incident. One of them was a man on my team named Garrett. He looked back twice in Sector 9. He was in the hospital for 11 weeks after. He could not explain to anyone's satisfaction, including the psychiatrists, what he had seen. He was medically separated from the service and he moved away, and I have not heard from him in 4 years. She began packing away the ration packaging. The rule is not arbitrary, she said. That is all I will say about it. The rule is not arbitrary. Part 2, The Year IT Changed, Chapter 5. The new team Vance retired in my 8th year. She had 30 years of service, which was the maximum term for retirement at full benefit, and she left on a Tuesday morning with a handshake from the district supervisor and a small party in the break room and a card that everyone signed. She looked on that Tuesday morning like a woman who was deeply relieved to be going. The team restructured after her departure. The district supervisor, a man named Aldrich who had come from an administrative background rather than a field background, and who consequently had what I would characterize as an imperfect understanding of what the field actually involved, made 2 personnel decisions in the months following Vance's retirement that I believe directly contributed to what happened later. The first decision was the transfer of 3 new officers to our team, all of whom had come from districts in the Southwest, where the terrain and the operational norms were significantly different from ours. They were competent officers. They had good records. None of them had worked in a district that had staircases. The second decision was the authorization of a systematic survey of Sector 9. This decision came from above Aldrich, as most of the decisions that mattered came from above Aldrich. It came in the form of a directive from the regional office, referencing a federal Land Management Act and using language about baseline documentation of unexplored forest assets. What it meant in practical terms was that a team of officers was going to enter Sector 9, survey its contents, document its features, and produce a report. I was assigned as team lead. I asked Aldrich, as directly as I knew how to ask, whether the regional office was aware of the nature of the features in Sector 9 and the protocols that governed interaction with them. Aldrich said that the directive referenced standard survey protocols and that all standard protocols would be observed. I asked whether the staircase protocol specifically had been communicated to the regional office. Aldrich looked at me with the expression of a man who has been asked a question he does not intend to answer and has decided that not answering is the answer. Standard protocols, he said again. Survey begins in 3 weeks. Get your team together. I put together the team. I briefed them on every protocol I knew, including the staircase protocol, clearly and in specific detail. I did not soften it. I told them exactly what Vance had told me and exactly what Teller had implied, and I told them what had happened to Garrett. I told them the rule was not arbitrary. The 3 new officers listened carefully. 2 of them, Park and Deneuve, accepted the briefing with the professional focus of people who understood that unusual operational environments sometimes had unusual operational rules. The 3rd, a man named Stroud, asked me several questions afterward, the kind of questions that were not quite skeptical but that had skepticism running underneath them like a current. Questions about the origin of the rule and whether there was documented evidence for the protocol, and whether the protocol had ever been formally reviewed. I answered his questions. I told him the protocol existed because experienced officers had established it based on their own observations over many years, that this was the same origin as most field protocols, and that the documented evidence for it was the accumulated experience of the people who had preceded us, and the fact that no officer who had consistently followed the rule had been harmed. Stroud nodded and wrote something in his notebook and said he understood. I believed him when he said it. Chapter 6. Entry into Sector 9. We entered Sector 9 on a Wednesday morning in late September, when the days were still long enough to give us 9 or 10 hours of good light. The sector had no established entry point, no trail, no marker. We accessed it from the nearest forest road in Sector 8, which terminated at a wide gravel turnaround approximately half a mile from the Sector 9 perimeter. We parked the vehicles, checked our equipment, and walked in. The forest changed when we crossed the sector boundary. This was not something you could measure or record in a field log, but every officer on the team felt it. The trees in Sector 9 were older than the trees in the surrounding sectors, their trunks wider, their canopies higher and more densely interlocked. The undergrowth was sparse, the way it always was in old-growth forest, the floor covered in a deep mat of moss and decomposed organic material. The light was the same quality it always was under a closed canopy, diffuse, directionless, without shadows. It was also very quiet. This I had expected, based on what Vance had told me and on the accounts of other officers who had worked the sector boundary in previous years. Old-growth forest is always quieter than younger forest because the closed canopy reduces wind, and the moss absorbs sound, and the ecological community of the deep interior is different from that of the edge zones. But the quiet of Sector 9 was deeper than this. The kind of quiet that is not simply the absence of sound, but the presence of something that takes the place of sound and fills the same space with a different quality of experience. We found the first staircase within 40 minutes of entry. It was at the base of a shallow slope, half obscured by the spread of a fallen tree whose trunk had decomposed to the point of near dissolution, its wood the color and consistency of dark sponge. The stairs rose out of the moss with the matter-of-fact quality of all the staircases I had seen in 11 years, as though they had every right to be there, as though their presence in the middle of a roadless forest 40 miles from the nearest structure was not the most impossible and wrong thing in the landscape. These stairs were different from the others I had seen. They were stone. Not the wooden construction I was accustomed to, not the silvered gray cedar of the stairs in Sector 4, but cut stone, the kind of close-grained dark stone that you found in old ecclesiastical buildings and pre-industrial construction, fitted together without mortar in the dry stone method that required extraordinary skill to produce, and that lasted, when done correctly, for centuries. The steps were wide, each one nearly 4 feet across, and there were 17 of them, rising to a height of perhaps 12 feet. The railing, if it had ever had one, was gone. The sides of the staircase were open. The stone was covered in moss that was identical to the moss on the forest floor around it, which meant either that the stairs had been here long enough for the moss to colonize them fully, or that the moss had somehow transferred from the forest floor to the stone in a way that mimicked the appearance of age. I noted both possibilities in my field log and photographed the stairs from 3 angles without approaching them. I marked the location, reported it to base on the radio, and led the team onward. Behind me, I heard Stroud ask Park very quietly whether he thought the stairs were safe to approach. I turned around. "Protocol," I said. "We document from a distance and we move on." Stroud looked at me. He looked at the stairs. He looked at me again. "Of course," he said. We moved on. Chapter 7. The pattern. We found 8 more staircases before noon. This was unusual even for Sector 9, according to the sector's recorded history, which I had reviewed in the district archive before the survey. Most officers who had reached the Sector 9 perimeter on adjacent operations had reported seeing staircases at the sector boundary, which had been the primary basis for the rule's reinforcement in this district. But the accounts suggested an average density of perhaps 1 staircase per square mile, which was already far higher than any other sector. We were finding 1 per half mile, and we were only a few miles in. But the more significant thing was not the density, it was the arrangement. Vance had told me the staircases in Sector 9 were arranged in a pattern. Standing next to the 9th staircase of the morning, with the coordinates of all 9 plotted on the survey map I was carrying, I could see what she meant. The 9 staircases formed an arc, a very large arc with a radius that I estimated at approximately 2 miles, centered on a point somewhere deeper in the sector that I had not yet reached. I stood with the map and looked at the arc and understood something that I did not have a clean way to write in the field log. The staircases were pointing inward. Not physically, they were all oriented in slightly different directions, but the pattern they formed pointed toward the center of the arc the way an arrangement of arrows points toward a target. They were a perimeter. They marked the boundary of something, and whatever they marked the boundary of was approximately 2 miles further in, at the center of a circle that no officer I had spoken to had ever reached. I radioed Aldrich and told him what I had found and what I believed it meant. Aldrich told me to continue the survey and document all findings. I considered, for a long moment, the option of calling the survey and leading the team back to the vehicles. I had the authority to do this if I determined that conditions warranted it. I considered the 3 new officers behind me and what I did and did not owe them. I considered what Vance would have done. I believe she would have turned around. I did not turn around. I have thought about this decision many times in the years since, and I do not have a complete account of why I made it. Part of it was the professional inertia of a man who has been told to complete a task by his superiors and who has not yet seen a sufficient reason to refuse. Part of it was something I am less comfortable admitting, which is that I wanted to know what was at the center of the arc. I had spent 8 years following the rule and not knowing, and the center of that arc was 2 miles away, and the survey directive gave me a professional mandate to go there. I led the team forward. Part 3, the center. Chapter 8. What Stroud did we found 3 more staircases in the mile between the 9th and the center of the arc. These were the oldest looking staircases I had ever seen, the stone so deeply colonized by moss and lichen that in some places The stone itself was barely visible beneath the growth. Some of the steps had cracked along their middle, the stone splitting slowly under the pressure of freeze-thaw cycles over what I estimated to be a very long period of time. The cracks were themselves colonized, ferns growing from the gaps in the stone with the untroubled persistence of plants that have been growing in the same place for a very long time. There were 17 steps on each of these 3 staircases, the same number as the first stone staircase we had found that morning. I noted this in the field log. Denuve asked me at the 11th staircase whether I thought the number was significant. I said I did not know. She looked at me in a way that suggested she thought I did know, or suspected I did. I led them away from the 11th staircase, and we continued toward the center. We were perhaps a quarter mile from the coordinates I had estimated as the center of the arc when I heard Stroud behind me and turned around. He was standing still. He was looking at the 12th staircase, which we had just passed, the way a man looks at something he has decided to do and is making the final internal calculation before doing it. "Stroud," I said. He turned to look at me. His expression was not defiant, which surprised me because I had expected defiance. It was something more complicated. It was the expression of a man who has a genuine reason for what he is about to do and knows the reason is not entirely rational and is going to do it anyway. "I need to look at the construction," he said. "The join between the step and the riser. It is a very unusual technique, and I have a background in stone masonry from before the service, and I want to understand how these are built." I told him this was not an option. He looked at me for a moment longer. "I will be 30 seconds, he said. "I will not go up." Before I could respond, he walked to the base of the 12th staircase and crouched down at the bottom step and ran his hand along the join between the first step and the second. He did this with the focused attention of someone doing exactly what he had said he was doing, examining a construction technique. His hands moved over the stone in the methodical way of a craftsman assessing workmanship. 30 seconds, I said. He was at the base of the stairs for perhaps 45 seconds. Then he stood up and looked at his hands, which had moss on the palms from the stone, and he turned back to us. Then he looked back at the stairs. I saw his body go still, not the stillness of relaxation, the stillness of a person who has seen something that has interrupted the normal functioning of their motor system. "Stroud," I said, "walk away from the stairs. Now." He did not move. I crossed the distance between us and put my hand on his arm. He was rigid under my grip in the way of a man in the grip of something that was not fear, exactly, but that occupied the same neurological territory. I pulled him away from the base of the stairs and turned him so that he was facing me rather than the stairs. "What did you see?" I said. He was looking at me but not seeing me, his gaze having that particular unfocused quality of eyes that are processing something interior rather than exterior. "There is someone at the top," he said. "When I was standing up, I saw someone at the top of the stairs. They were facing away." I held his arm and looked at his face. "Do not look back," I said. "That is the most important thing I am telling you right now. Do not look back at those stairs." He blinked. He focused on me. "I understand," he said. I led him away from the stairs and did not let go of his arm until we were 50 yards clear of them. Then I called the team together and told them, as directly as I knew how, nobody looks back at any staircase from this point. If you have seen something at the top of a staircase, you do not look back. You turn away and you keep moving and you tell me what you saw and we document it, and we do not look back. They all acknowledged. Stroud acknowledged with the particular quietness of a man who had just understood, through direct experience, that the rule he had questioned earlier in the morning was not arbitrary. Chapter 9. The clearing at the center of the arc was a clearing. It was not the natural kind of clearing that appears when a large tree falls, and the gap in the canopy, allows light to reach the ground, and plants spring up in the light. It was the kind of clearing that is the absence of trees without any other obvious cause. A circular space perhaps 200 feet in diameter, in which nothing grew above knee height. No trees, no saplings, no shrubs. Only the same moss and low ferns that covered the forest floor, and even these were sparser here than they were under the canopy outside the clearing. The clearing was not empty. At its center, arranged in a pattern that I recognized immediately as the same arc I had mapped on the outside of the sector, were 17 staircases. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked at them for a long time. They were arranged in a circle, each one facing inward, each one rising to the same height of approximately 12 feet, each one made of the same dark stone. They formed a ring around the very center of the clearing, spaced at equal intervals, their highest steps all at the same level, so that from where I stood at the clearing's edge, they formed a kind of broken crown, a ring of stone steps rising from the moss and reaching toward the open sky above the clearing. At the exact center of the ring of staircases on the moss was a single flat stone, large and rectangular, perhaps 6 feet by 3, lying flush with the ground. It was the same dark stone as the stairs. It was unmarked. I stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. Then I did what I had come to do. I got out my field notebook and my camera and I documented what I saw. I photographed the clearing from the edge. I counted the staircases. I noted their arrangement, their dimensions as best I could estimate from the edge, their material, their condition. I noted the flat central stone. I noted the dimensions of the clearing. I noted the absence of natural regrowth within the clearing boundary. I did all of this from the edge of the clearing. I did not enter it. Deneuve and Park documented alongside me, professional and thorough, their cameras clicking at intervals as they worked methodically around the clearing's circumference. Stroud stood back from the edge slightly, which I understood and did not comment on. He held his camera, but I noticed he was not using it, and after a while he put it in his vest pocket and stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the clearing with the expression of someone looking at something they cannot stop looking at despite themselves. Then, Stroud walked into the clearing. Chapter 10. What Stroud did next, he did not run. He did not seem agitated. He walked in from the edge with the calm and purposeful stride of a man who has made a decision and is carrying it out. I called his name. He did not stop or acknowledge. I called it again, louder, and Deneuve and Park both looked up from their documentation. Stroud walked to the center of the clearing and stood beside the flat stone. He looked at the stone for a moment. He walked around it once. Then he looked up at the ring of staircases surrounding him and turned in a slow circle, studying each one in turn. The protocol was clear. I should not have entered the clearing. Everything that Vance had told me and that Teller had implied, and that the accumulated operational wisdom of 11 years had communicated, told me that the clearing was a place I should document from the perimeter, and then leave without entering. The rule about the staircases was not the only rule that applied here. The broader rule, the one that sat underneath the staircase rule and gave it its foundation, was this: there are places in deep forest that you document from a distance, and the distance is not arbitrary, and you do not close it. I entered the clearing. I want to be precise about what I experienced when I crossed the boundary of the clearing, because it is the kind of thing that is easy to describe imprecisely, and the imprecision changes the meaning. When I crossed from the forest floor to the clearing's edge, I did not hear anything change or feel anything dramatic. There was no sudden cold, no sound, no visible alteration in the clearing itself. What changed was something interior, a quality of awareness that I would describe as the sudden knowledge that every direction I could look was the wrong direction. Not in the sense of a compass bearing, not in the sense of danger in a specific direction. In the sense that whatever was in this clearing did not have a direction. It was not behind me or above me or to any side. It was present in the way that pressure is present, as a quality of the environment itself rather than a feature of it. I crossed to Stroud in 15 seconds and put my hand on his shoulder. He startled, which he had not done at the stairs, where the stillness had been so complete that my grip had barely registered. He startled and turned to look at me with eyes that were fully present and fully alarmed. "We need to leave," I said. "Did you see them?" he said. I looked at him. His face had the quality of a face that has received information it cannot organize. "The tops of the stairs," he said, when I was looking at them from the center. "They are all occupied, every one of them. They are standing on every top step." I had been looking at the ring of staircases since I entered the clearing. I had seen nothing on any of the top steps. I looked at the ring of staircases again, all 17 of them, each top step empty in the gray flat light of the clearing. "I see nothing on the stairs," I said. Stroud looked at me with the particular expression of a man who is deciding whether what he is about to say will make things better or worse. "They are not facing inward," he said. "When I was in the center, they were not facing inward. They were facing me." I took his arm and walked him to the edge of the clearing. Deneuve and Park fell in beside us without being told, and the four of us crossed back into the forest, and I set a pace that was brisk without being a run, and I led them back the way we had come. I did not look back at the clearing. I do not know what Stroud did. Chapter 11. The walkout was approximately 4 miles along the route we had taken in. I set a pace that covered the ground as efficiently as possible without pushing the team into the kind of rapid movement that generates noise and disorganized awareness. I wanted us moving and I wanted us coherent. We passed the 12th staircase without incident. I told the team not to look at it. They did not look at it. We passed the 11th, the 10th, the 9th. I counted them because counting was a way of knowing where we were and how far we had to go, and because having a number to track was a way of keeping my own attention organized. The forest was very quiet around us. I noticed, which I had not had the bandwidth to notice on the way in, that there were no bird sounds, no movement in the undergrowth, no insects. There was only the sound of our own footsteps on the moss and our own breathing. And even these sounds seemed absorbed almost immediately by the forest, returned to us muffled and shortened the way sound behaves in a room lined with heavy fabric. We were passing the 7th staircase when Park said, quietly from behind me, "Something is at the top of the stairs." I said, "Do not look at it. Keep walking." I heard Park take 2 steps, 3 steps, continue. Then Park said it moved. It came down 1 step. I said, "Do not look at it. Keep walking." Deneuve said, "From the left of the formation, I can see it too. At the 7th. It came down another step." I said, "Nobody look at any staircase. Eyes forward. Keep walking." I heard them comply. I heard their footsteps continue. I kept my own eyes forward on the compass bearing, on the moss ahead of us, on the thin blades of light coming down through the canopy. From behind me, Stroud said, "Ray." His voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. Not panic. Something quieter than panic and more serious. I said, "What?" He said, "They are on all of them now." I said, "Do not look at them." He said, "Ray, they are at the bottom of some of them." I said, "Walk. Keep walking." We walked. The staircases passed to either side of us. I did not look at them. I heard from the direction of the 5th staircase a sound that I have never been able to describe with full accuracy. It was not a footstep. It was not a vocal sound. It was the sound of something descending a stone staircase, each step distinct, 7 sounds in sequence, which was the number of steps from the top of the staircase to the bottom. And the 7th sound was on the forest floor, which meant it was at the bottom, which meant it was level with us, and the 5th staircase was 12 feet from the path we were walking. Nobody in the team said anything. We kept walking. I counted the staircases as they passed. 4, 3, 2, 1. Ahead of us, the forest continued in its uniform way. Old growth trees and moss and thin light. No marker to indicate the sector boundary. No visible sign that the perimeter was approaching. I trusted the compass bearing. I trusted my own sense of the distance we had covered. I had been in this forest for 22 years, including 3 as a civilian before I joined the service, and I trusted my sense of this land. We crossed the sector boundary and the quality of the air changed. It was subtle. It was not dramatic, but the pressure that had been in the environment since we entered Sector 9 receded. Not all at once, but gradually. The way the pressure in a room recedes when a window is opened, and the forest around us became the ordinary old-growth forest it was in every other sector. Close and quiet, but not impossible, not wrong. I stopped and turned and counted. 4. Deneuve, Park, Stroud, and myself. 4. We continued to the vehicles without stopping. Part 4, what came after Chapter 12. The report I wrote the survey report that evening, sitting in the district office after everyone else had left, and it was the most difficult professional document I had ever written because the honest version of it could not be the version I submitted. The honest version would have required language that had no place in a federal land survey report, would have required me to describe things that I had not seen with my own eyes, but that I knew had happened based on the accounts of my team members, and based on the accumulated knowledge of 2 decades of working this land, and would have required conclusions that no supervisor in my chain of command would accept without an immediate referral for psychological evaluation. I wrote the report that I could write. I documented the staircases in precise terms, their number, locations, dimensions, material, and condition. I noted the clearing at the center of Sector 9. I documented the ring formation of staircases in the clearing and the central flat stone. I provided all GPS coordinates and photographic documentation. I recommended, in the strongest language available to me within the conventions of a federal survey report, that Sector 9 be maintained in its current restricted access status, that no further ground surveys be authorized, and that the staircases be categorized as sensitive cultural resources under the relevant federal act, which would place them under legal protection and restrict public access, without requiring an explanation of why protection was warranted. Aldrich reviewed the report and called me the next morning. He said the regional office was very interested in the clearing and the ring formation. I said I had made a recommendation in the report. He said the regional office was interested in a follow-up survey with a larger team and more documentation resources. I said I would not lead it. There was a pause. He said, "You are the district's most experienced officer." I said, "I understand that. I will not lead a second survey of Sector 9. I will support any other officer who leads it with everything I know, but I will not go back in." Aldrich said he would note my position. I said, "Please also note that in my professional judgment, based on 11 years of operational experience in this district, a follow-up survey of Sector 9 presents significant risk to the officers involved, and that risk is not quantifiable in the terms that our standard risk assessment framework provides for. I am telling you this because I am obligated to tell you this, and because I want it on the record." He said he would note it. The follow-up survey was authorized 6 weeks later. Chapter 13, the second survey. The second survey team was 8 officers, led by a man named Carrasco who had been brought in from the regional office specifically to lead it. He was a capable man and an experienced field officer, and he had been briefed on the staircase protocol and on the findings of the first survey. I spent 2 hours with him before the survey, telling him everything I knew, everything Vance had told me, everything I had observed in 11 years. I told him about Garrett. I told him about the clearing. I told him about the quality of pressure in the environment of Sector 9 and what it felt like, and when it changed. I told him about the sounds from the staircases on the walk out. Carrasco listened to all of it with the focused and professional attention of a very good field officer receiving a comprehensive briefing. He asked good questions. He took notes. When I finished, he sat for a moment and looked at his notes and then looked at me. "Is there anything that would make it safe?" he asked. I thought about this honestly for a moment. "Staying out," I said. He nodded once, a small nod that I read as the acknowledgement of an honest answer rather than the acceptance of its implication. They went in on a Thursday morning. 8 officers, with upgraded radio equipment and satellite communication devices as a backup, with body cameras and a helmet-mounted lighting system, with a medical officer on standby at the sector boundary, with a drone team that would attempt canopy-level documentation from outside the sector. The drone lost signal within 4 minutes of launch before it reached the sector boundary. The radio contact held for 2 hours and 19 minutes. Carrasco radioed position updates every 30 minutes as arranged, and the first 3 updates were received clearly, reporting steady progress toward the clearing. At 2 hours and 19 minutes, Carrasco radioed a position update, and his voice was different. Not distressed, not panicked, but different in the way that a voice is different when the person producing it is working to keep it the way it is. He reported that they were at the clearing. He reported that the staircases were present as documented. He reported that the central stone was present. He said, "We are documenting the site. Everything looks as described." Then, after a brief pause, he said, "There is something on the stairs, beginning documentation of that now." The radio was silent for 4 minutes. Then Carrasco said, in a voice that was fully controlled and fully professional, "We are leaving the clearing. Returning to entry point. All officers present. I will report on our return." The radio was silent after that. No officer from the second survey returned from Sector 9. The medical officer at the sector boundary reported that she had heard footsteps in the forest at the perimeter approximately 3 hours after the team had entered, and that she had called out, and that there had been no response, and that the footsteps had continued and then stopped, and that she had then heard nothing further. She had waited at the perimeter for 6 hours before raising the alarm. The search operation that followed lasted 11 days. It found 3 bodies. 5 officers, including Carrasco, were never found. The 3 bodies that were recovered were found inside the sector boundary, within a mile of the entry point, and their cause of death was recorded as exposure, which was the finding that the medical examiner could support with the physical evidence available, and which I believe was simultaneously true and entirely inadequate as an explanation for what had happened to them. Chapter 14. The federal review that followed was conducted by a team from an agency whose specific identity was not disclosed to me, despite several requests, in a process that I was told was standard following any multi-fatality incident involving federal employees. I was interviewed 4 times over 8 weeks. I gave the same account each time: what I had found on the first survey, what I had recommended, what Aldrich had done with the recommendation, and what I believed the second survey had encountered. The review team asked me many questions about the staircases, detailed questions about their construction, their arrangement, their number, their age. They asked me about the clearing. They asked about the central stone. They asked in the 4th interview whether I had any personal theory about what the structures were or who had built them. I said that in my opinion the structures were very old, possibly predating any recorded human settlement in the region. I said I believed they served a purpose, that the arrangement of the outer arc and the inner ring and the central stone suggested deliberate design for a specific function. I said I did not know what the function was. They asked me what I thought was at the top of the staircases. I said I did not have a name for it. They asked me to describe it without naming it. I said, I think the staircases are thresholds. I think they are entries to something that exists in this location, and that has existed here long enough to have had structures built for it, by people who knew it was here and who needed a way to interact with it. I think the structures are very old. I think the thing they were built for is older than the structures. I think going up the stairs is a way of entering its territory on its terms, and I think coming down the stairs is a way of leaving. And I think the figure at the top of the stairs is a consequence of the transit, not a separate entity. I think it marks the boundary. I think, I said, that my officers crossed the boundary in the wrong direction without the correct terms of crossing, and that what happened to them happened as a result. The review team wrote things in their notebooks. They thanked me for my account. They told me they would be in touch. 6 weeks later, Sector 9 was designated a restricted zone under federal authority. The designation was not publicized. The unpaved road at the sector boundary was closed with a locked barrier. The staircase protocol was formally reviewed and amended to include a prohibition on entering any forest clearing in which staircases were present. I was offered an early retirement package with full medical benefits. I accepted it. Part 5. What I Know Now, Chapter 15. Stroud. I have stayed in contact with Stroud, which is more than I can say for Park or Denuve, both of whom left the service within a year of the first survey and who have not responded to the messages I have sent in the years since. I do not blame them for this. Stroud left the service 18 months after the survey and now lives in a small town in the Mountain West, doing work I will not specify to protect his privacy. He is functioning. He is employed. He has a life that is, by most external measures, an ordinary life. I called him last year, on the anniversary of the first survey, which I do every year. We talked for about an hour. We talked about his work and about the town, and about the things that people in ordinary lives talk about. Toward the end of the call, as it always does, the conversation found its way to Sector 9. I asked him whether he still thought about what he had seen at the top of the stairs. He was quiet for a moment. I do not think about what I saw, he said. I think about what I did not see. I asked him what he meant. When I was at the base of the 12th staircase and I looked up and saw the figure at the top, he said, I felt something that I have spent 4 years trying to describe accurately and have not fully succeeded at. It was not fear. I have been afraid of things in my life, and I know what fear feels like. This was different. It was more like recognition. Not that I recognized what I was seeing, but that what I was seeing recognized me, that it knew something about me that I did not know about myself. He paused. I did not look back a second time, he said. You told me not to, and I did not. But I have spent 4 years wondering what I would have seen if I had. And I have come to believe that the reason you are told not to look back is not because looking back is dangerous for the reason I originally assumed, which was that it would provoke some kind of attack or pursuit. I think the reason you are told not to look back is that what you see on the second look is not what you saw on the first look. And what you see on the second look is something that you cannot come back from knowing. I asked him what he thought that was. He said, I think it is the answer to the question that the first look asks. I think the first look is the question, and the answer is what the figure shows you when it turns around. I thought about this. I asked, what do you think it shows? He said, I think it shows you where you are going, not in the metaphorical sense, in the literal sense. I think it shows you the specific place and the specific moment when you will stop being present in the world. I think that is what broke Garrett. I think that is what happened to the 3 bodies they found in Sector 9. I think they looked back. We did not talk about it further that call. We returned to ordinary topics and said goodbye, and I put the phone down and sat for a long time in my living room with the quiet of a house at night around me. I have thought about Stroud's theory many times since. I believe it is correct. Chapter 16. The stairs I have not been back to Sector 9. The restricted zone designation and the barrier on the access road would make an unauthorized entry legally problematic, but that is not the primary reason I have not gone back. I have not gone back because I do not need to. I have what I went in for, which is understanding, or as much understanding as a person can have of something that does not resolve cleanly into the categories that human understanding provides for. I know what the stairs are. I believe I know what they were built for, and I believe I know something about what occupies them, and has occupied them for longer than any structure in Sector 9 has stood. I have my theory, which is Stroud's theory, and I hold it with the particular confidence of a man who knows he will never be able to prove it, and who no longer needs to. What I think about most in the years since leaving the service is not the thing at the top of the stairs. That is the part of the story that most people would assume was the central horror. The thing you see on the top step, the figure facing away, the second look that you do not take. But what I think about most is the stairs themselves. Someone built them. That is the thing I return to. Whatever occupies those staircases, whatever has been at the top of those steps for as long as the steps have existed, it was not the builder. I do not believe that. The construction of the outer arc and the inner ring required knowledge and skill and deliberate planning. It required people who had a relationship with what was there, who understood it well enough to build for it, who worked out some form of accommodation between themselves and the thing in the forest that resulted in 17 stone staircases, in a clearing and an outer perimeter of wooden stairs marking the approach. I think about those people. I think about what they knew that we do not know. I think about what the exchange was, what was given and what was received, what the terms of the accommodation were. I think about how long it held and whether it still holds, and whether the disappearances in Sector 9 represent a breakdown of that accommodation or an enforcement of it. I think about the flat stone in the center of the ring, featureless and unmarked, lying on the moss. I think about what it was for. I do not come to conclusions about any of these things. I turn them over. I look at them from different angles. I let them be what they are, which is questions I cannot answer and that I have decided to stop expecting to answer, because the expectation of an answer is its own kind of harm. Chapter 17. Advice. I am writing this account primarily because of the bodies, because of the 3 people who died in Sector 9 and the 5 who were never found, and because of the 11 officers who went into that sector between the first survey and the federal restriction, and who were not all recovered. I am writing it because the non-disclosure agreement I signed asks me to protect the institutional interests of an agency that I believe knowingly sent people into a situation whose risks it did not disclose to those people, and I do not consider those interests worth protecting. But I am also writing it because of the stairs that are not in Sector 9. Because Sector 9 is the extreme case, the oldest and densest concentration in our district, and it is an unusual case even within the broader picture. But the broader picture is this: there are staircases in forests throughout the country. In every region I have been able to confirm through conversations with officers from other districts over the years. They are not unique to the Pacific Northwest. They are not unique to old-growth forest. They appear in younger forests, in forests at lower elevations, in forests in other climate zones. They appear with less frequency than they appear in Sector 9, and in most cases the thing at the top of them is less present, less aware, or appears not to be present at all, but they are there. If you are a hiker or a camper or a hunter or anyone who spends time in deep forest, there is a possibility that you will find a staircase. If you are in a forest that is remote enough and old enough, the possibility becomes a meaningful one. And if you find a staircase in the woods, I want you to know the following things. First, do not approach it. You can look at it from where you are. You can take a photograph if you wish, but do not approach within 10 feet of its base. Second, if you have already approached it and are standing at its base, do not go up. Turn away from it and walk away from it and do not look back at it. If you want to know whether you followed this instruction correctly, the answer is that you will not know, because if you look back to check, you will see something on the top step, and if you look back a second time, you will learn something you will not recover from learning. Third, if you have already gone up, come down immediately and walk away and do not look back and do not stop walking until the staircase is well behind you and the ordinary sounds of the forest have returned. There are ordinary sounds in a healthy forest. If the forest around you is silent, keep walking. Fourth, if you are deep in old forest and you find a clearing, and the clearing contains staircases arranged in any kind of pattern, do not enter the clearing. Turn around and walk out of the forest by the most direct route available to you. Do not enter the clearing under any circumstances. Fifth and last, if you know an officer in the U.S. Forest Service and you ask them about the stairs, they will probably tell you they do not know what you are talking about. They are not lying to you because they want to deceive you. They are telling you what they have been told to tell you. And they have been told to tell you that because the people who make those decisions have decided that the alternative, which is telling you the truth, is more disruptive to the functioning of the institution than the outcome of people going near the stairs without knowing what the stairs are. I disagree with this decision. That is why I am writing this. The stairs are real. The rule is not arbitrary. The figure at the top is not a trick of the light or a product of an overstressed mind in an unusual environment. It is there when you are off the stairs and not there when you are on them. And it is there because the staircase is a boundary and the figure marks the boundary. And it is patient and it is present. And it has been present in those forests for longer than any record or any memory reaches. And it will be present long after every person who has ever climbed those stairs or refused to climb them is gone. Do not climb the stairs. That is the only thing that matters. Epilogue: I moved to a city 2 years after I left the service. I live in an apartment on the 14th floor of a building in a neighborhood that is dense with other buildings and pavement and the ordinary sounds of urban life. There are no forests visible from my window, which was a factor in choosing the apartment, and I am aware that this makes me sound like a man with an irrational fear, which is not what I am. I am a man with a very rational fear that I have arranged my life to accommodate. I walk in parks. I have a reasonable relationship with urban trees. I do not avoid nature. But I do not go into deep forest anymore, and I do not intend to. My former district is still operating. The officers there follow the protocol. New officers receive the briefing in their first week, in the same flat and matter-of-fact manner that Vance briefed me 22 years ago, and they hear it the way I heard it, as a strange protocol with an unexplained origin that they will eventually come to understand through the accumulation of experience. Most of them will follow the rule correctly for their entire careers, and the rule will protect them, and they will retire having never understood exactly what the rule protected them from, which is fine. That is probably the best possible outcome. Sector 9 remains restricted. The barrier on the access road is intact. The federal designation holds. Whatever is in that clearing is in that clearing, in the way it has always been there, not diminished by the years since the survey, or by the attention the incident received, or by the signs posted at the perimeter telling people to stay out. The signs mean nothing to it. The designation means nothing to it. Nothing that people do at the perimeter of Sector 9 means anything to it at all. It was there before the Forest Service. It was there before the district and the sectors and the maps and the access roads. It was there when the people who built the stairs were there, and it was there before them, and it will be there long after the signs have rusted through, and the road has been reclaimed by grass, and the buildings in the town of Aldenmore have fallen and the forest has grown over them, and the region has returned to the old quiet that it came from. The stairs will be there too, waiting, patient, facing away. I think about Vance sometimes, about the Tuesday morning she left and the look on her face, which I now understand better than I did at the time. It was the look of a woman who had spent 30 years being responsible for other people in a place that was dangerous in ways she could not fully disclose, and who was finally and completely and without reservation done. I understand that look. I sit in my apartment on the 14th floor, and I listen to the traffic below and the ordinary human sounds of a city doing its ordinary business. And I am grateful for every single one of those sounds, for the particular comfort of a world that is entirely and completely explainable. A world full of noise and crowds and pavement and the small, ordinary difficulties of city life. A world that asks nothing of me that I cannot give. I do not miss the forest. I miss some things about the work. The team and the mornings and the satisfaction of finding someone alive who was not expected to be alive. I miss Vance. I miss the version of the forest that most people know, the version that is beautiful and large and full of birds. But that version and the version I know are the same version, and knowing both of them means I cannot have one without the other. And so I sit in my apartment and I let the forest be what it is, far away in its sectors and its clearings, with its staircases and its silence and its particular quality of patience. And I do not look. I have learned in everything that mattered not to look. The end.